They found the body beneath the sign of Scorpio. Not in the stars, but on the wall. In a long painted hall in an Italian palace, a nobleman lay collapsed on the marble floor, his skin darkened by poison, his hand frozen in mid-gesture as if still trying to point at something. Above him, on the crumbling plaster, a figure of death rode under the Zodiac of Scorpio, scythe raised, trampling human bodies. Servants whispered that the painting had predicted his death. Others said it had chosen him. The palace was called Schifanoia, a strange word that means to chase away boredom. It was supposed to be a place of pleasure for the Dukes of Ferrara, filled with music, poetry, and elaborate festivals. But in the late 1400s, the mood inside its walls turned sour. Courtiers began to fall ill in patterns that didn't feel random. A banquet here, a hunting party there, and always one person dead soon after. Different ages, different ranks, but all of them connected to the same building and the same mysterious fresco cycle that ran along its main audience hall. On those plastered walls, 12 zodiac signs rule over strange scenes, kings in triumph, peasants working fields, obscure allegories based on an astrological system so complex that even modern scholars struggle to decode it. Hidden among the symbols are images of violence, decay, and divine judgment. For a small circle at the Este court, these weren't just decorations. They were a calendar, a code, a map of power and fate. Tonight the question is simple and terrifying. Did someone at Palazzo Schifanoia use those painted stars as a murder manual? This is Cult Files, and this is the story of the Palazzo Schifanoia murders, Italy's alleged Renaissance death cult. A case where art becomes prophecy, where astrology may have guided poison, and where an unsolved pattern of deaths still haunts a forgotten palace. Ferrara, at the end of the 15th century, was a city that lived on spectacle. Ruled by the Este family, it rivaled Florence and Milan as a center of Renaissance culture. The dukes poured money into art, architecture, and pageantry, not just because they loved beauty, but because it was a way to project power. If you could turn your court into a stage where gods and heroes seemed to walk among mortals, people might forget how fragile your rule really was. Palazzo Schifanoia began as a simple retreat on the city's edge, a place where the Este dukes could escape the formalities of the main castle. Under Duke Borso d'Este, it became something else, a magical machine of images. Around 1469, he ordered his artists to cover the Great Hall with a continuous cycle of frescoes that would represent the entire structure of time. Months, zodiac signs, mythological deities, and the life of his own court all woven together into one enormous visual program. Each wall of the hall was divided into 3 horizontal bands. The top band showed the triumph of a classical deity associated with that month. The middle band displayed the zodiac sign presiding over that period. The bottom band depicted scenes from the life of the Este court, hunting, judging disputes, distributing favors, presented as if harmonized by the heavens above. Seen as a whole, the cycle wasn't just decoration. It was propaganda. It said, "Our ruler governs in alignment with the cosmos itself." To design this complex system, Borso relied on an astrologer named Pellegrino Prisciani. Prisciani drew from obscure texts that mixed astronomy, magic, and Neoplatonic philosophy. He arranged the figures, symbols, and even small background details according to a logic only initiates would fully understand. The result was a room where images functioned almost like a secret book, readable to those with the key, baffling to everyone else. After Borso's death, the palace passed to his successors, including Duke Ercole the Ban and later Alfonso I. They kept using Schifanoia for festivals and ceremonies. But as the 16th century approached, Ferrara's glittering surface began to crack. Political alliances shifted. Wars with Venice and the Papal States drained resources. Inside the court, factions formed around different branches of the Este family. The same images that once celebrated perfect cosmic order now looked down upon a world sliding toward chaos. It is during this uneasy period that rumors of strange deaths associated with Palazzo Schifanoia begin to appear in letters, chronicles, and later accounts. The pattern is never recorded as an official case. Renaissance courts like to keep scandals quiet, but fragments survive. A young courtier who collapses after a banquet, his symptoms consistent with poison. An advisor who dies suddenly on the very day his horoscope had supposedly warned of danger. A lady of the court who wastes away over months, her illness described in metaphors that echo the imagery of one of the palace's Zodiac panels. None of this on its own proves anything. Renaissance Italy was full of sudden deaths, and astrology was popular across all levels of society. But in Ferrara, the combination of a palace literally painted with an astrological program and a series of suspicious deaths created fertile ground for a darker idea that someone at court was using the fresco cycle as a script for murder. To see why people might have believed this, it helps to understand how seriously astrology was taken. In the 15th century, astrology was not a fringe practice. It was embedded in medicine, politics, and daily life. Princes consulted astrologers before battles or marriages. Physicians used star charts to determine the best time for treatment. Even the church tolerated certain forms of natural astrology, as long as it didn't claim to override God's will outright. In Ferrara, the Este court prided itself on having some of the most sophisticated astrologers in Italy. Prisciani and his successors were not charlatans in carnival tents. They were university-educated scholars, versed in Ptolemaic astronomy and Islamic occult science. For someone steeped in that world, the frescoes of Palazzo Schifanoia weren't just art. They were a living diagram of cosmic influence. Now imagine a person who not only believed in the system, but decided to weaponize it. In the stories that survive, the alleged murders associated with Schifanoia rarely look like public executions. They are private tragedies. A stomach illness that appears after a shared meal, a melancholy humor that never lifts, a sudden fainting during a ceremony. Officially, such events were explained through the language of humors and misfortune. Unofficially, people whispered about poison and about the way the victims' lives seemed to align with certain dangerous configurations in the Zodiac. In one oft-repeated tale, a minor noble who had fallen out of favor with a powerful court faction was invited to a banquet held in the Great Hall of Schifanoia. The month painted on the wall was March, presided over by Aries. In the middle band, the zodiac sign is flanked by martial figures and scenes of conflict. The noble boasted that he no longer feared the palace intrigues. He had consulted his astrologer and believed his stars were favorable. Later that night, he fell violently ill. Within days, he was dead. Those who disliked him shrugged and called it nature. Those who remembered where he had been sitting, beneath a section of the fresco where a mysterious figure pours liquid into a cup, saw something else. Were these deaths the result of a true death cult, a group that combined astrology and poison in a systematic way? Or were they isolated acts of murder later folded into a more sensational story? Historians are divided. What is clear is that Ferrara had both the means and the mindset for such a cult to exist. Poison was a common tool in Renaissance politics. Italian courts invested heavily in apothecaries and physicians who understood both healing and harm. a slow-acting poison, correctly dosed, could mimic natural disease. Combined with an astrologer who knew when a victim was most vulnerable, physically or symbolically, it could create the illusion of fate at work. The frescoes of Schifanoia added another layer. They offered a ready-made narrative framework. Kill someone during the month of Scorpio when death rides across the wall, and it looks like destiny. Arrange their public appearances so that important meetings or ceremonies take place under specific zodiac signs, and you've staged not just a murder, but a story. Those who understood the imagery would see the pattern. Those who didn't would see only tragedy. Some have suggested that the alleged cult at Schifanoia may have centered on a small circle of courtiers and intellectuals fascinated by Hermetic and Neoplatonic ideas, the same currents that flowed through Florence around Marsilio Ficino and the Medici. In that worldview, the cosmos is a chain of correspondences. Planets, metals, herbs, body parts, and even human souls linked through invisible sympathies. To harm someone on one level is to disturb them on all levels. A murder committed at the right astrological moment, in the right place, with the right substances, becomes more than a crime. It becomes a ritual. Of course, secret groups do not leave clear evidence. What we have instead is a pattern of absence. The sudden deaths at court that are glossed over lightly in chronicles. The portions of the fresco cycle that were later whitewashed or damaged without clear reason. The lack of open investigation into cases that, by all accounts, shook the inner circle of the Este court. Silence is not proof, but in a palace obsessed with images, certain silences are loud. By the early 16th century, Palazzo Schifanoia had begun to fall out of favor as a residence. Political realities pulled the Este dukes toward other priorities. Parts of the building were converted to storage or neglected entirely. The magnificent frescoes, once a proud symbol of cosmic harmony, faded into darkness and dust. Some sections were lost when walls were altered. Others were covered with lime during later renovations. Whatever stories the images had once told to those who could read them, they stopped speaking for centuries. When scholars and restorers rediscovered Schifanoia in the 19th and 20th centuries, they approached it primarily as an art historical treasure. They marveled at the surviving fresco fragments, argued about their iconography, and noted the influence of Pisanello and other masters. A few, digging into archival material, stumbled on the rumors of suspicious deaths and astrological intrigues. Most treated these as colorful but unreliable anecdotes. After all, Renaissance writers loved scandal as much as we do. Yet the idea of a Palazzo Schifanoia death cult refuses to die. It lives in the gaps between art and politics, between belief and paranoia. It is fed by the undeniable fact that people in that time and place sincerely believed the stars could influence life and death, and that some were willing to use any available tool, including poison, to protect their power. The truth is that we may never know whether there was a formal group with oaths and rituals meeting secretly beneath those painted ceilings. What we can see clearly is that the palace itself functioned like a ritual space. Its images shaped how people at court understood time, fate, and authority. In such an environment, it would not take a literal cult for astrology and murder to intersect. One ambitious courtier with access to both the apothecary and the astrologer's calculations could weave those threads together, turning private resentment into something that looked, from a distance, like cosmic judgment. Today, visitors walk through the restored hall of Palazzo Schifanoia with guidebooks and smartphones. They admire the zodiac figures, the chariots of the gods, the scenes of Renaissance life. Few know the stories of the people who supposedly died in harmony with these images. Fewer still pause to imagine how it must have felt to stand in that room 500 years ago, knowing that a rival had just collapsed, and seeing above your head the very sign that astrologers had warned was dangerous. What remains is a question that fits perfectly in the Cult Files archive. How far will people go to make their beliefs feel real? In Ferrara, it seems, someone may have been willing to turn a painted horoscope into a weapon, transforming a pleasure palace into a quiet theater of death.